record. And I'm also going to share my screen so we can get started with our presentation today. Whoop. Let's go back to the top. All right. So if you guys didn't know before you signed up today, or maybe you did, today we are going to talk about salmon. So the name of the youth event is Salmon Talk, and we're going to talk a little bit about why salmon are super important fish and really important for the Southern Resident Orcas. So first I want to talk to everybody about what makes a salmon, because there are a lot of fish out in the Salish Sea, out in the Pacific Ocean, and around the world, right? So salmon are native to the Pacific Northwest. And when I say they're native, it means that they belong to this area by birth. So they originated here, or this was the first place that we found them, and they continue to be native to this area for that reason. Salmon are anadromous, and that's a really funny word. I kind of broke it down so you guys can see the pronunciation of it. And what it means is they divide part of their lives between freshwater, like rivers and streams, and saltwater, like the sea and the ocean. So half their life they're probably spending in freshwater, half their life in saltwater. It depends on the species. And when they're in either rivers and streams or the sea and the ocean, they need a couple basic things in order to survive. They need that water to be cold, clean, and oxygenated, which means they need plenty of oxygen to be able to pass through the gills in order to breathe underwater and survive. So salmon here in the Pacific Northwest are all born in freshwater, so that's where they start their life. And then they're going to spend a little bit of time developing there, but the length of time that they spend in freshwater depends on the specific type of salmon. So when they're ready, they're going to begin to migrate out toward the open ocean, and that's where they're going to grow bigger, become stronger, and become adults. So once they become adults, they're going to return to spawn in their natal streams, and they're going to create the next generation of salmon. And so when I say natal stream, what I'm talking about is they're going to go back to the exact stream that they were born from, which is pretty remarkable. The fun fact about all of it is they can find the natal stream that they were born in using their sense of smell. So salmon can smell really well. Their specific stream they were born in has a smell unlike any other, and that's how they find their way back to where they're going to return to spawn. There's 5 different types of salmon in the Pacific Northwest here, and so I want to go over them with you guys. I've created this little salmon species legend here. And so the first salmon in the upper left-hand corner is sockeye. The one in the middle is chum salmon. We have pink salmon. We have this big guy, the Chinook, also known as king salmon. So if you've heard Chinook or king, it's the same fish. And then we have our silver salmon, also known as coho. And so one really fun thing I'm going to go over with you guys in order to learn this is if you use the fingers on your hand, we have 5 fingers on our hand, there's 5 salmon species in the Pacific Northwest. I'm actually going to teach you a little rhyme game to remember them. So I might ask you guys to help me out here, but let's walk through it. So for the first one, if you consider your thumb as your first finger, there's a salmon in my legend right here, and that salmon's name rhymes with thumb. So Orion, I saw your hand raised. Do you want to tell me what salmon you think we could assign to our thumb?
I was actually going to ask a question about the legend, but it took me a second to find the raised hand option.
Gotcha. What's your question about the legend?
So, I know that all the fish on here can be eaten some long days ago. Something like that. But which one tastes the best overall?
So I guess that's probably a matter of preference, and I can tell you that I haven't had the option to taste all 5 of these salmon before, But I bet if we were to do a poll, a lot of people probably really, really like Chinook salmon. And I'm going to tell you why that is later on in the presentation. But good question. So to kind of get back to this first question I have for you guys here, so this salmon's name rhymes with thumb. If you look at all 5 of the salmon in my legend, which salmon do you think rhymes with thumb? Anybody want to guess? Orion, you want to go again?
I know which one it is.
Okay, tell us.
Chum.
Chum. Very good. So I'm going to pull the chum salmon out. So we've got salmon's name rhymes with thumb, that's chum. So that's a really good way to remember that one. If we go to our second finger, which is our index finger, we usually point with the index finger if we're trying to get someone to look at something we're speaking about specifically. So the little catchphrase for our finger, our pointer finger here, is poke you in the eye, and it rhymes with eye. What do you guys think? What salmon species? If you guys know how to use the hand raise feature, I can only see a couple of boxes.
Sockeye. Sockeye.
Perfect. So poke you in the eye, sockeye. So I'm going to go ahead and pull sockeye over to our pointer finger. All right, the third one here. This salmon and this finger are the biggest. So out of what's left, Ben, go ahead, let us know. What's the biggest salmon, do you think?
Chinook. And you said that a lot of people like Chinook.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that one reason the orcas are starving?
We're going to talk about that.
Good.
Yeah, good job though.
So here, I'll have it like that, so if you want to guess.
Awesome. So Chinook is the biggest. That's another reason why it's nicknamed King. And if you think about your biggest finger on your hand, it's that middle one right there. So that's the finger we would assign that one to. Now your fourth finger is known as your ring finger. In fact, I'm holding up the one that I currently have a little band on currently. But if you look at the 2 that are left, Franny, you want to guess which one might be assigned to the ring finger?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's pink.
Oh, you're close. So it's a type of metal. If you had to guess, which one do you think?
Silver.
Silver, yeah. So this is your ring finger where we could say silver wedding bands are worn. Not everyone's is silver, but it's an easy way to remember that salmon. And then, of course, last but not least is going to be our pink. And we assigned it to the pinky finger, which kind of makes sense, right? That one should be really easy to remember. So what do you guys think? If you were to be able to name all 5 of them, now that I took the words away underneath the salmon, do you think you could do it using your hand? Does somebody want to try?
Yeah.
Okay. So Knox, why don't you give it a try? I saw your hand raised. You want to tell me what your thumb?
Can I just ask my question?
Oh, yeah.
So how many different salmon are on all of the world?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know a lot about the salmon that are over in the Atlantic Ocean, which is the Bahamas side. I don't know if she could pop on and tell us if she knows how many salmon species might be in the Atlantic. Does anybody know?
I only know of the Atlantic salmon. That's the only one I know of.
Okay, and that's the only one that's coming to my mind too. So I'd have to look that up for you, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You stumped me. Now I have homework to do. All right, guys, does anybody want to try to guess all 5 of these real quick before we move on?
Me.
Oh, who's that? Okay, is Laszlo, Rocky, and Lucy, somebody want to give it a try?
Me. I want to.
All right, let's hear them. What's your thumb?
Chum.
Okay. Poke you in the eye with your pointer finger?
Sockeye.
Yep. And then this salmon is the biggest?
Chinook.
Chinook. And then this is where you would wear your ring on your finger?
Silver.
Perfect. And then what's the last one?
Pink.
Pink. You guys are great. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the salmon life cycle too. That's really important to know. Everything in the salmon world and fish world is starting off as tiny little eggs. They're going to be deposited into the sediment, and there's going to be a little bit of development that happens at this stage too. So as the salmon start to grow a little bit bigger, they're also known as embryos at this point. So that's the cause for this bigger picture right here next to these little eggs. When they start growing, they will hatch out of that little egg in about 3 months. And so freshwater, like I said at the beginning, is going to be the very beginning of the salmon life cycle. So that's where they're going to start life. Now, the second stage, they're known as alvin at this point, and they feed off of this little orange yolk sac that's attached to them for a couple of weeks. So they're not eating any food through their mouth just yet. All the energy and the nutrients that they need to survive was already put together in that little egg sac that they were developing in. So they're going to use that until it's gone. And they're not quite swimming yet. So at this stage, they're still kind of in the sediment and in the rocks, and they're still in fresh water. The third part of the salmon life cycle here, they're finally growing a bit bigger. We call them fry at this point, and they're about 5 to 10 weeks old. So at that point, they've completely used up that yolk sac we talked about at the last stage, and so they're going to start swimming around. And one of the reasons they start swimming is because they've got to start finding food for themselves. At this stage, 2 out of 5 of the species that we went over, so our pink and our chum salmon, automatically are looking to leave freshwater and go directly for open ocean. So they're really tiny when they do this at this stage. And then they're going to grow a little bit bigger into fish that we call par. And at this point, they're probably several months old. So that wouldn't be our pinks and our chums. They've already left. But our chinook, our silver or our coho, and our sockeye are still going to be in the river at this point, and they're going to start developing markings and different fins that they're going to use to help themselves navigate and become bigger fish. And then the fifth part of the life cycle here is when these fish have been developing for maybe 1 to 2 years. They're going to get much bigger. At this stage, we call them smolts. So that's our sockeye, our silver at about 1 to 2 years old, and then they're going to head out to the open ocean. So they'll make that migration right around that point. And chinook leave a little bit earlier than that. So they're going to be about 5 months old, but at this point, they're still considered smolts. So they're growing. They've got those little markings that they're developing as they become mature fish. And then they're going to reach adulthood. So they're out in the open ocean at this point. They've successfully made the migration out of the fresh water. They're in salt water. And they're going to spend 1 to 8 years out in the ocean. Again, it depends on which species. Our chinook salmon are actually the species that spend the most time out in open ocean, and they're the ones that grow the biggest. So it would make sense that they need more time to develop and become those really big fish. Before the last stage, which is when they change from regular adults to spawning adults, which means they're ready to head back to fresh water. And when they're in fresh water, they have one job. They've got to make it all the way back upstream to wherever they were born, and they're going to spawn the next generation of fish. So they're going to deposit the eggs, and they're going to start that life cycle all over again. Now, what's really interesting about this cycle is it's one of those things that just kind of keeps going and going and going. So that's why I've got it in a big circle here. And you'll see after the 7th stage is done and they're done spawning, that next generation is going to pick up and start over where those spawning adults left off. Now, we talked a little bit about where they were given their life cycle. And I do want to point out on here, there's one area I wanted to make sure everybody knew about, because it's not something that we talk about a lot. But if you were to look at this graph that I have here, we've got our rivers and streams pointed out. So that's where our fresh water is coming from. Most of it is going to be any snow that's accumulated on the mountains, and then has, as it gets warmer, it will melt and start running off into the rivers. And you'll notice in this spot down here, the elevation is a little bit lower. It's still fresh water until we get about to this point right here. And this point is something that we call an estuary. So it's actually a different environment where saltwater and freshwater come together and they're mixing up. Ben, do you have a question? Okay, what's your question?
Is there like a certain place where they will usually spawn?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna show you at the end of this graphic. That's a really good question. So hang tight for me just a second. But so one reason I want to point the estuary out to you guys is because it is pretty important. So an estuary is this coastal area where freshwater and saltwater meet and mix. So it's not quite ocean and it's not quite river, but it's an area that the salmon are going to have to navigate through to get out to the open ocean. And what occurs right here is all of these things that are brought down the river and then where the oceans meet create some of these barriers. So if you guys were looking at all these little dots right along here at the mouth of the river before we make it out to the open ocean, there are mud flats, there are sand spits, and then there are little barrier islands that start. And most of these are formed by all of the sediment or the ground that is kind of rolling down the river with the water. It's these deposits that are made. But what's really cool about that is it's almost like the river is creating a habitat right before you get to the open ocean. So the reason I point it out is because there are a lot of species that live in the estuary environment. So not necessarily all the way up in the mountains where the fresh water starts and not necessarily out in the ocean, but kind of in the in-between. And some species might even use the in-between and one of the other environments too. So when salmon are moving through this area, they have to figure out how to hide from some of those predators there that are waiting to kind of snag them up and make lunch out of them, right, before they head into the open ocean. So that's one reason I wanted to go over this area with you guys. One area around the Salish Sea, so this is located on the Olympic Peninsula. If you were to go out toward like Port Angeles, is the Elwha River, and there's a great estuary. So this picture that I'm showing you guys here, if you were to look at the graphic down here, you can see some of these sand spits, some of these barrier islands out here. And what's really great about it is everything that lives here is pretty protected from the ocean because of these barriers right here. So it really is important habitat for a lot of species. So to get back to Ben's question, I'm going to show you guys a little bit about what the salmon migration looks like. And I'm going to use this little fish right here to start you guys off. So let's say right about here, so not all the way up in the mountains, but kind of close, right? We're up in elevation. Let's say that's the starting point for salmon. So they hatch from their eggs at this point and they're growing. And when they get to the point where they're going to start migration, they've got to go downstream. So now they're kind of in a completely different environment down here. We're going to have a lot more trees. They're going to keep making their way into this estuary environment. So you can see there's going to be some, you know, the reefs, the spit, that all creates these kind of, it's like a puzzle or a pathway that they have to work through to get out to the open ocean. And then finally, they're going to make it to the ocean. And like I mentioned before, it's about 1 year to 8 years that they're going to spend out there before they're ready to come back. And when they come back, their number one purpose is to try to get all the way back up the river, right to where they were hatched, to lay the eggs for the next generation and start the whole cycle over. So not only do they have to navigate all of these when they're coming out, they have to figure out how to get back through the estuary as even bigger, more noticeable fish to these predators. So they have to make it through the estuary. They have to make it through the bottom portion of the river. And then they've got to fight their way back up against the current, avoiding predators, all the way back up to where they were spawned originally. Does anybody think that that just sounds amazing for this, you know, little fish that they have to do out there? Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the Salish Sea, and especially because we have a couple people that joined us today that may or may not be familiar with this bioregion. And when I use that word, this map does a really great job of illustrating what I mean when I say that. So it's not just all of these big bodies of water that you see here. It does include them though. So it's the Strait of Juan de Fuca that leads in from the Pacific Ocean. It's Puget Sound, the Strait of Georgia, and then the barrier up around Desolation Sound is about the range and the extent of the Salish Sea. But what's really interesting is that the boundary line for this entire area is surrounding watersheds and rivers that flow directly into the Salish Sea. And so that right there is our connection between our salmon and then the sea that we live in and around. And it's really helpful that those rivers flow right into the sea because they're trying to make it out to the ocean. So I wanted to show you guys a little bit. And I didn't pull all the rivers out. We have a lot of rivers and a lot of streams that flow directly into the Salish Sea here. So these big bodies of water. And so all my little bluefish would just be an example of fish that are starting out life, and they're going to have to come out through those river sheds, make it into the ocean. But if you notice, we've got salmon way down here in the Nisqually River. We've got them in the Stillaguamish here, the Skagit up over the border in Canada. The Fraser River is a really big one for our salmon. But then we even have a couple over here on the island, Vancouver Island here, that feed into the Salish Sea as well. So those rivers are bringing fish and other nutrients into the Salish Sea. What's kind of cool about this is when salmon out migrate, so when they leave the river, they could travel 3,000 miles or more to get to areas out in the open ocean where they're going to become adults and try to find a lot of food in order to do that. So I kind of put our adults right along a few areas that I know where people have told me that fishing is really good. And at that point, if humans are fishing for salmon, they're looking for big adult salmon, right? But I wanted to point this out because if you look at a fish that might be all the way up here in the Fraser or all the way down here in the Nisqually River, they might be traveling farther to get all the way out to the northwestern point of Vancouver Island here versus maybe one that leaves the Stillaguamish and then comes out and hangs right out here. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Now, one really cool thing about salmon is those 5 species that I told you guys about. It's not just like the Fraser River is the only river you'll find Chinook in. Chinook are probably in all of these river sheds all the way around the Salish Sea. And it doesn't just happen once a year or twice a year. So because of that, because of when they return, and the genetics, so all their, the way that they're made up is very unique to the time of year that they leave the river and the time of year that they come back. So what scientists have done is within those 5 salmon species, they've made up groups of those species and we call them salmon stocks. And so it just depends on what river they came from and the season that they return to spawn. So to give you a, for instance, if we have Fraser River salmon, so if we have Chinook that leave the Fraser at a certain time of the year and come back at a certain time of the year, then we might refer to that specific stock as Chinook Fraser Fall River Salmon Chinook. So we're naming the place that they came from, the season that they're coming back, and then the species is in there too. So if it sounds kind of complicated, you saw me, I was having trouble even saying it. It's just kind of how we keep track of the salmon species as they're returning and leaving. And one of the reasons is because only 1 out of 1,000 adult salmon might live long enough to come back and spawn in rivers again. And we talked about why, right? I showed you that whole cycle about leaving the river and all the things they have to navigate and all the trouble they have with predators and things that are looking to also eat them. And then they've got to make it for 1 to 8 years in the ocean and then make that huge voyage back to try to get up to the river and spawn. So it's pretty dangerous. 1 out of 1,000, that's pretty incredible. And so what's happened over time, and Ben pointed this out a little bit ago as well, is our wild salmon stocks, we've been seeing a decline, which means the numbers are not as great as they used to be. And there are lots of reasons for that. But I point that out to say that there are over 100 wild salmon stocks that have gone extinct. And if you guys have been on some of our lessons before, we've talked about extinction. It's basically when the last member of a specific stock, in this case, disappears and never comes back. We don't have the genetics capable to create that specific type of fish in the environment anymore. And right now we're looking at a few other wild salmon stocks that are threatened too. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then that is going to segue into us talking about orcas. But before we talk about orcas, I want to talk to you guys about how many species actually depend on salmon. There are over 135 species that depend on salmon so that they can survive, which is amazing. So I have a few little vignettes here to kind of show you guys some of the animals that we can expect that depend on salmon. And this is at different stages of their life cycle, and this is in different environments. And so it's really interesting is we refer to salmon as a keystone species. And when I say that, this keystone indicates or says that this is a species of really, really vital importance. And they feed many animals, but not just the animals. I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but a lot of the trees that grow right along the riverbanks where salmon return to are actually healthier, because once salmon spawn, the next part of the process is they typically die, and the nutrients that they've carried from the ocean back into the river sheds actually help feed the trees along the riverbanks as well. So it's not just animals that depend on salmon for survival. Our trees are benefiting from salmon as well. So if we think about this in the broader context, if all of these species depend on salmon and salmon were to disappear, then a lot of these animal species would be drastically impacted. They might disappear too, and the environment would certainly change. So that's kind of what it means to be this keystone species. It's just a really important species. And then I kind of went over this already, but salmon play an important role in watershed health. And I talked about why they're bringing those nutrients back into inland waters and kind of the terrestrial or the earth environment instead of just the water. So I'm going to pull Katie back on, because the next thing we're going to do, we're kind of doing this a little bit out of order, but I want you guys to think about this slide that I just shared with you, and the one about the salmon life cycle, kind of where along the rivers, the estuary, and the ocean these things happen. And we're going to do the activity before I get to the orca part of the talk, because I want you guys to be able to think about this a little bit and have it fresh in your head. So Katie, if you want to come back on.
Yeah, I'm here. And right before you leave, Amanda, we had a great question in the chat.
Yeah.
Laszlo wanted to know if he could have the salmon life cycle slide. And I was just thinking maybe we could offer the whole slideshow afterwards if anybody else wants this information.
If either Laszlo or maybe Mom, if you want to put an email address in the chat, I'll make sure that I write that down before we log out today and then get it to you pretty immediately. And then, yeah, we're talking about putting this whole slide on our website. We have a new website with Orca Network that's going to be launching here shortly. They're working out the rest of the kinks. But we do want this to be a resource that's available for kids and adults alike. It doesn't matter if it's a brand new topic. This is a really great way to get some basic information on it. So I'll make sure that I PDF this and send it over to you for sure. So if you want to just provide your email, or if you want to email me, I'm just amanda@orcanetwork.org, and I have no problem sending that over. That's great.
Thanks, Amanda.
I was going to suggest to Katie, I don't know if it's going to help since we only have a few boxes on the side of our screen. We could have everybody unmute when it comes time to weigh in on some of the decisions once you explain the activity, but it's totally up to you.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Okay.
Let's do that. So what we're going to be doing here, if you look at your screen, on the upper left corner, we have rivers and streams, and then we have estuary in the middle, and then ocean on the right. And then, just to make it a little trickier, sometimes some of these animals could be found in both rivers and streams and estuaries, or both estuaries and ocean, or all three. So we're just going to start over here on the left with the Caspian tern. And I would like somebody, or a lot of somebodies, to let me know what their guess might be for what part of the ecosystem that Caspian tern lives in.
So guys, feel free to unmute. You can just tell us your answers. We don't have to go through the hand raising feature on this one. Where do you guys think that bird is found? It's kind of like a gull, like if you were, just to give you a hint.
Ocean?
I hear ocean.
I think all three.
Somebody thinks all three. Any other thoughts before I click the answer?
Maybe. I think maybe in the estuary and the ocean.
Estuary and ocean. Okay. So I'm going to click to reveal. You were right. So both estuary and ocean is where that bird depends on the salmon to live. All right. So maybe, keep tally here. So our next animal is the bear, if you can see where my little question mark is. So I'm going to take guesses on this one before I reveal the answer. Where do you think a bear depends on salmon?
And the river and stream.
The river and streams.
River and
I
stream.
think the river and stream as well. River and stream.
All three.
Unanimous. Okay, let's click and reveal. Oh. So both the estuary and the rivers and streams. We were sure about the river part of that. Okay, who's next? The harbor seal. I bet we've all seen a lot of these.
Ocean.
Ocean.
Ocean?
Estuary?
Ocean. I think the ocean and estuary.
Okay. I definitely heard estuary in there too. Are we ready for the reveal?
Yep.
You are correct. It's both the estuary and the ocean. Okay, and up next we have the otter, the river otter.
The river.
River. Huh?
River and estuary.
River and estuary.
All three.
River and estuary.
Oh, I heard
Estuary.
three in there. Okay, should we see? Whoever said all three, you guessed it. That was our first all three.
That's a really tricky one too.
Yes.
So good job.
They're good little travelers. That's what that means. Okay, now we have a raccoon.
River.
River.
Rivers and stream.
River.
Okay, I heard all rivers. Let's see. You got it. All right, and next is the heron.
Ocean and estuary.
All three.
All three.
All three.
Estuary.
So most of you said either estuary and ocean or all three. Ooh, rivers and streams and estuary. That was
That
our
one's tricky too. So I've seen heron out in the ocean, but the places where they're catching salmon the most are going to be those two places right there. So not to confuse anybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, now we have the cool salmon shark.
Ocean.
Ocean and estuaries.
Ocean. All
That's
three.
strong ocean. All right, let's see. I'm revealing. Ocean.
Everybody knows a shark lives in oceans.
Well, so in some areas, the sharks do go up the rivers and streams, so that was a good guess. Okay, so about the eagle.
Ocean. All three.
All three.
I think all three.
Pretty strong on the all three. Let's see if we're right. You got it.
Yes.
Ocean.
Okay, two left. We have our orca.
Ocean.
Ocean and estuaries.
Ocean and estuary.
Estuary.
Ocean.
Oh, and last one is tricky. The human.
I think all three.
Three.
Awesome. You guys did a great job.
Yes.
So one thing to point out before we leave this screen, we said over 135 species depend on salmon. So look at how many predators they have to try to avoid in all of these environments. It's a little scary, right? No wonder only 1 in 1,000 make it back to that stream to respawn. So I don't want to forget about the Southern residents. One of the reasons we decided to cover this topic this month is it was Orca Recovery Day on the 17th. We usually pick the third Saturday, and the whole state has kind of been celebrating that with us the past few years. With everything going virtual, they decided that instead of just doing something one day, we were going to do it the whole month. So this was part of what we decided we wanted to do for Orca Recovery Day. So we want to make sure we talk about the Southern residents and their connection to the salmon that we talked about. So if you guys have been with us before, we've covered a couple topics concerning the Southern residents. They are a very unique community, and unique means they're unlike any other community on the in the oceans around the world. We do have orcas in every ocean around the world, but the Southern residents are very unique to us here. They're a community of fish eaters, and they were declared endangered in 2003 in Canada and in 2005 in the United States. And they use the Salish Sea to find food. Right now, the population has 74 individuals. And it was very fun to have to change the number on this slide. It did say 72 the last time I gave this talk, but we've had 2 babies born in the population, so it's been nice to increase the number. But with the number being 74 still, it's thought to only be half of their historic population size. And even with the 2 that we've added, that number is still really low. I think it's still the lowest it's been in 30 to 40 years. So based on that information, they're not recovering the way that we would hope that they would recover after being listed as an endangered species. Orion, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Okay, so, a couple of them actually.
Okay.
Does Whidbey Island area-ish around here, all that, Strait of Wanapeka, everything, does that count as, no, I'm gonna blank on the word, S something.
Estuary.
Yeah, that.
That's a good question. So the major waterways are going to be saltwater, and it's going to be considered a sea. So it's an inland sea. It's not quite as big and vast as the ocean. And the salinity, or the salt content of the water, is a little less than it is out in the Pacific because of all of the freshwater streams that are bringing salmon, bringing fresh water into the environment. And so the estuary is really just right at the mouth of a big river, and it can grow over time or it can shrink over time depending on what's going on with the river. When we put up some natural impediments, and by that I mean like if we build dams and we start controlling the river in a way that's not natural, it can actually slowly start to shrink the estuary. The Elwha I shared with you guys is actually a really great one to share, because that's what was happening after some dams were put in place there. But once they went through the process and removed the dams, what's been happening over the past 5 years really is that estuary area is growing dramatically because the river is bringing down mud and driftwood and sediment, and so it's starting to create barriers back around that area. So the estuary is really close to the coast, and it's really just going to be right at the mouth of the river. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And so around here is more brackish, but it's not technically that estuary. Yes.
It can occur at the estuary, and what's happening during that time is more sediment or more mud, so more of that dirt is coming down through the fresh water or being mixed up, and that could be because we've had more rainfall that carries the water more rapidly down through the river, and it's going to bring the deposit of all of that dirt and that sediment very quickly. And if it's mixed up and not settling down back on the ground, then that's what creates kind of that brackish water. So not quite translucent, and it looks kind of muddy, right? It's a great question. Did you have one more? All right. Well, with that, I just wanted to say with our Southern residents, we have another unique orca community here that also uses the Salish Sea to find food, but they are not eating salmon. So they are our bigs, or our transient orcas. They eat our seals, sea lion, and porpoise, and their population is doing really well. So they're healthy. Their population increases by 4% every year. There are over 500 of these individuals, and about 300 of them come into the Salish Sea to try to find food here. So based on those things I'm saying, what do you guys think the difference is between the Southern residents and the Biggs orcas?
I think that because of the big the big orcas, it's because of what they eat that they're doing really well, because there's more of their food.
You're exactly right. So good job. So that is the difference. Is our Southern residents as fish-eating orcas depend on wild salmon. And I'm going to actually break it down and show you guys how much they depend on salmon. But since our salmon are struggling, that's the direct connection with why the Southern residents are struggling. So we're seeing a decrease in salmon. That's kind of led to the decrease in the population. On the flip side, our mammal-eating orcas, our bigs, they have plenty of seal, sea lion, and porpoise populations. All of those animals are pretty healthy and abundant, so there's lots to choose from when they come into the Salish Sea. So another thing that's kind of hindering them is neither community. So if you're a fish-eating orca, you're always a fish-eating orca. You only hang out with the fish-eating orcas. You don't breed with anyone other than the fish-eating orcas. You really can't talk to each other. The language is a little bit different there. So there are lots of things about their culture and their community that keep them separate from one another.
Amanda?
Yeah.
I see 2 hands up on Rowan and Ben. Just
Okay.
wanted to make sure if they still had a question or if they were still raised from the other portion.
Okay. Ben, do you want to go first?
I forgot.
Okay, we've got time for questions at the end too, so we can come back if you forget. And then I didn't catch who the other hand was. I'm sorry. Rowan, do you have a question? If you forgot, we do.
Another Rowan.
I see Rowan Davidson with his hand up.
Wait, I'm Ron Davidson. Do I have a hand up?
Maybe it was an accident. I'll lower it, and then if you do have a question, you can put it back up.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know. I didn't see either one of those.
No problem.
All right, guys, so really quick, I just wanted to show you, everybody knows what a pie chart is, right? If we were to take a cookie or a pie and we were to divide it into all of these little triangles, one reason I want to show you this is look at how much of that pie is made up of Chinook salmon. So it's not even that the Southern residents like salmon and that there's a lot of salmon out there, it's that they really have a preference for one particular type out of the 5 that we covered. Now, they will eat a couple of other salmon species. So our silver or our coho are on here. Our chum is on here as well. And our sockeye is on here. And if you were to do some quick math and add 1, 5, 7, and 82 together, and I guess this unidentified salmonid too, I don't know if they just couldn't categorize that last one there or not. It's about 92% of their diet in total that they're depending upon these 5 species of salmon to really ensure that they survive, but mostly it's the Chinook salmon, which is pretty crazy, right? So do you guys notice that pink is missing from this equation? So earlier, someone asked me about the way that salmon taste. I've been told that pinks are not very, I'm not sure what the flavor is like, but people do not prefer pink salmon. And for some reason, neither do the Southern residents. So it's possible that pink salmon don't taste very good, because that's not just humans that are telling me that. That's the whales that are telling us that too. But I find it pretty interesting that we have pinks that run out of the rivers and back, and the residents don't seem very interested in coming in when the pinks return to the river. So they're not part of that pie chart. And I'm going to say just yet, because we never know, right? As Chinook numbers keep going down, some of these other parts of the pie might increase as they try to figure out what other kind of food source they can eat to supplement their diet or fill in what they're not getting with the Chinook salmon. So the other thing about this is when southern residents aren't getting enough to eat. So when there's not enough of the Chinook and there's not enough of the other salmon species that they will eat, there are a few other things that happen as well. And so two of the things that kind of makes the situation a little bit worse for the residents is that there's underwater noise that can interfere with their ability to find food. So they echolocate, they use vibrations that they send out and receive to try to find their prey. If it's noisy, sometimes that can be interrupted. And then contaminants, so pollution, anything that is in those rivers that is going to be brought into the sea or that is in the sea that causes toxicity and pollution, that kind of builds up in the food chain and it builds up in the blubber for the southern residents. So when they're not eating and getting enough to eat, they're living off that fat reserve and that blubber, and those toxins are then released in their system, and it could cause them to be unhealthy. It could make them more susceptible to diseases. So there's a lot of things that can happen if they're not staying healthy and fed. But first and foremost, it's getting enough to eat for those southern residents. So what will happen if wild salmon don't start recovering, right? What happens if we keep losing the salmon? So for the southern residents, that would be a decrease in prey. Anybody have any guesses what they think might happen?
Decrease in predator.
Say that again?
Decrease in predator.
A decrease in predators, exactly, and specifically a decrease in our southern resident orcas that are depending upon them. So excellent. So yep, if salmon keep declining, then sadly so will the southern residents. But I do want to point out, this is a great photo series I was able to capture. This was actually J41 eclipse that just gave birth at the end of September, and this is her actively chasing salmon at the surface, and I witnessed this summer. So they were finding some food that we know of kind of in and around the San Juan Islands this year, which was really nice. And then with those two calves showing up, they must have found something wherever it's been that they're spending more time other than the Salish Sea. So really what I want to reiterate to you guys is the southern residents are threatened by vessel disturbance, toxicants, which is pollution, but above all, it's that lack of salmon that they depend on for survival. So I'm going to get Katie back on here and we're going to wrap up. We wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you guys can do to help the southern resident orcas and to help salmon, because we've got to help them both, right? So Katie, you're on.
All right, thank you. So I'm just gonna click through a couple of ideas and then you guys can either offer up your own after we talk about these two or three ideas, or that can just be what you take away today and talk with your family about what you can do to help the salmon and the southern resident orcas. So I'm just going to go through this first one here. One thing that you can do yourself is to plant trees and restore salmon habitat, because the streams require trees and bushes around them to keep the water cold and oxygenated. That's a great way that you can help. I know it's one thing that we have here on our outdoor classroom on Whidbey is they have restored the salmon run there by just planting trees around there. And you can find these planting events where you can do your own on your own right now, or you can find an event at podmatch.org, and that website is down here at the bottom, to find a planting party, which it could be a fun thing to do. Something else you could do, and this is pretty easy for most of us, we're probably already doing this because we care about the environment anyway. So cleaning up trash near rivers or on beaches. And so that salmons aren't the only one that need clean water. And we definitely need to keep our beaches and streams clean. When it's not COVID regulation time, we have a lot of beach cleanups just for the Orca Network that you can always look to our website to join, or you can just go clean up your local beach, go with a group of friends. And one last thing that we are going to suggest, and then you guys can bring your ideas forward, is to contribute to our sightings network. So if you see an orca, report them to us. And why that is important is because we take all of that data from all of the sightings, and actually our friend Elisa is on here and she runs that network. We take all of that and we can share it with the researchers and the scientists in the area, and that tells us where the orcas are going and when they're going, and that helps us know which runs we need to help the most to protect. So if anybody would like to offer up their own ideas, this would be an awesome time for that, or you can just take it with you for something to think about.
So we figured we'd build in some time if anybody had any questions after all that. If you have a suggestion, like Katie said, how do you think, you can help salmon and help orcas? We're always asking that question too. You guys might think of some things we haven't thought of, so we would love to hear what you have to say. Ben, I see your hand up. If anybody else, it's because Ben is on my screen. If anybody else wants to raise their hand virtually, we'll call on you too, but go ahead, Ben.
Is there a reason why like you said that the Chinook salmon earlier they grow up and leave to the estuary faster?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason for that?
It's just genetics. So because they spend almost 8 years out in the open ocean, it's kind of this internal clock that each species is born with. And once they reach a certain life cycle stage or a certain amount of time, what's going to happen is they actually have to biologically change to survive in saltwater. So they're born in freshwater, not, we have a lot of saltwater fish that can't survive in freshwater. So they're not equipped to be able to process some of the salt that's found there, or vice versa. These guys have to go through this big change where their whole biology changes so that as they make their way down the river and into the ocean, they can survive by the time they get there. So it's just something that as they're going through that change, they automatically go, okay, I'm changing. I got to make it out to the saltwater so that by the time this change is done, I can survive out there. And for every species, it's different. I'm not sure if scientists really know why, right? There's still a lot of studies that happen, but it definitely has to do with kind of this little internal clock that they have, for the same reason that birds just magically know when it's time to migrate, right? From cold places to warm places. It's really hard for us humans to figure that out because we don't have anything that tells us that we're making changes or we have to be someplace different. So that's kind of the magic of salmon, but I'm glad you asked that question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I also see Charlie and Delia have their hands up.
Perfect. Delia, you want to go first?
I was wondering why the pink salmon is called that.
I think that it has to do with probably the color of the salmon, although the last time I saw pink run, they were kind of silvery too. So it could be something to do with that. I don't know if I know the exact answer to that question though. Most salmon are kind of that pinky orange color on the inside. So it could have something to do with that though. That's a good question, and you're giving me more homework, so I appreciate that. All right, Charlie, you got a question or do you have a suggestion?
Well, I had 2 questions.
Okay.
Do you know the best orca sighting place, like to see an orca?
So I don't know if we know what the best place is. I can tell you that if you're talking about Southern residents in particular, that they used to come in and be around the San Juan Islands all summer long. People used to tell me that they could go out, and if they were out at on the west side of San Juan Island, so that's where Haro Strait kind of divides the United States from Vancouver Island in British Columbia, there used to be enough salmon around there that the residents would be there almost daily in the summer. So that would have been a really good way to just ferry over to the island, drive out to the west side, and pick a spot to sit and watch the orcas. But because salmon have been moving around more infrequently and their numbers have declined, our orcas have also started creating this situation where they're not coming in here as much as they used to. They're going to go wherever the food is. And so they've been spending a lot more time outside the Salish Sea in open ocean, And it's been a lot harder for researchers and then people like us that just want to see them to have the opportunity to see them. But we do have, if you want to go to our website, so Orca Network, we've got a map that was created using Google Maps. And on that map, when you pull it up on your computer, we've identified a lot of public access places. So this could be a park, it could be a boat launch, a trail, just different places that are open to the public so that we know we're not trespassing on private property. And most of those places are places people go when we know that the residents are coming in and around and a report has been made, people start getting out to all of those places. So I don't know if that helps because I don't really know what the best place is. If you figure it out, I hope you tell us because I would love to know what the best place to see orcas is.
Well,
What was your second question?
Well, this is not the second question, but
Okay.
do you know a place where people can see the orcas? Not like they'd see them usually, but like they'd see them at this time in fall.
That's a really good question. I actually do know the answer to that one. So right now, we have seen the southern residents come into central and southern Puget Sound. They're going to come in the Strait of Juan de Fuca from the Pacific Ocean. And then they've been making a southerly turn and coming into the body of water between Kitsap and the Olympic Peninsula and Whidbey Island. So I didn't get to see it last week, but when they came in through Admiralty Inlet right there, which is the name of that body of water, we had a bunch of volunteers from Orca Network. We had friends, the community, anybody that reported, they were all getting out to like Fort Eby. State Park was a good place to see them from, in different areas like that. Every now and again, we get really lucky, and in the fall, they'll come up near Langley Whale Center. And so we can leave the center and literally go 1 block up the street and see them right from where we're working. They just haven't done that yet this year. But in the fall, they're chasing chum salmon down into the South Sound, so down around like the Tacoma area and Commencement Bay. So this is a really good time for anybody that lives on Whidbey, on Kitsap, even Silverdale. Sometimes if you guys can drive a little bit to get out near the shore, Tacoma, Bainbridge Island, Seattle, those are all really good places to try to catch them. And we usually know kind of early if they're coming in because we can pick them up on the hydrophones if they're talking to each other all the way up at the north part of Admiralty. So we're talking Port Townsend, Bush Point. So that's pretty early, kind of like an early warning detection to know when they're coming in so that everybody in South Sound can figure out if they want to get out and try to see them.
All right, Amanda, I have actually a suggestion that I wanted to share from the chat box and a question from the chat box. So Delia's mom said, writing to your government leaders to encourage them to protect salmon. And we love that answer. And it's definitely something that we want to encourage people to do, to take down dams or deal with logging, definitely. And then the question was, what do the salmon do if they can't make it back to their natal stream because of a dam or something like that?
Yes. So we've been seeing that, right? We have had the Snake River, which is inland from the Columbia. So if you were looking at a map, it's this big river that divides Washington State from Oregon State. Used to be a really big river that produced a lot of salmon. And in the Columbia specifically, we have 4 really big dams in that system. And then as you make your way into the interior, there are 4 more dams along the Snake River. And so we talked about all of these, not just barriers, but even trying to avoid predators and this big maze that these salmon have to try to get through just to get back to the river, or the part of the river that they spawned naturally. Now we're adding another element where we're putting up these giant barricades, and salmon have to figure out how to get up these things. In some instances, certain dams have fish ladders installed on them, and they it doesn't look like a ladder in the way that we think about it, but it's a passageway that they can jump up to get over some of the dams. So if they can make it up all of these dams and into that stream, they can respawn or spawn up in that area. It's the downflow of those little smolts that I talked to you guys about. So when Chinook are about 5 months and they're getting ready to come out of those rivers and they're looking to get out to the ocean, a lot of what's happening is they're either unable to pass through the dams as small fish, or it takes them a long time to figure out how to do it. And we talked a little bit about how the biology of the fish changes because they're trying to leave freshwater to go survive in saltwater, and they're kind of on a time clock. It's a change that happens very fast. So usually when that change happens, they kind of ride the river out to the open ocean. It usually happens very quickly, so within maybe a couple of weeks. If it takes them too long to get out to the open ocean and they've already adapted to live in saltwater, sometimes that means that the salmon don't survive and don't make it out to the open ocean. So there's a lot that goes on with some of those structures that we have put in the middle of the rivers that either make it impossible for salmon to get back to where they came from, or not make it out once they hatch. So those are two things that are definitely impacting salmon around Washington State on quite a few rivers and up in British Columbia as well. That's a really, really good question and a super suggestion. If you guys don't know who to write to, we've been very grateful and thankful that our governor currently has been pretty attentive to what's happening with the Southern residents. So any bit of encouragement we can give him to make good decisions. He knows enough about the Southern residents and what's happening that some gentle encouragement could be exactly what he needs to try to get with the right people and make decisions like that. I love that suggestion.
And we have a hand up with Laszlo, Rocky, and Lucy.
Perfect. What do you guys think?
Well, I wanted just to say that my grandma, she once like swam really close to orcas. She goes swimming every day. And,
Really?
yeah, and in Langley, and she got really close, like.
Wow. I bet you have seen your grandma swimming down there. She's brave. That water's cold. That's really cool though.
Yeah. And she said that their family were so big.
I bet. Well, awesome. Guys, if anybody else has any questions or suggestions, I know we're about 15 minutes over. We did wait a few minutes just for everybody to try to get settled today, but I want to be respectful of your time. So if you think of questions later, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, if there's anything from this that could be valuable for some of our volunteers and educators that are on here with us today, you can feel free to email either Katie or me. We will get those over to you. And our emails are really easy. It's just our first name. So it's either going to be Amanda or Katie at orcanetwork.org. And those emails will go directly to us so we can get you whatever you might need. Charlie, you have one more question?
My second question is, if someone saw an orca and you hadn't named it yet, would the person who saw it, if they showed a picture, would they be able to name the orca?
I sure wish it worked that way. So what's actually happening is it's different for the Southern residents than it is for the bigs or our marine mammal eaters. For the Southern residents, the Whale Museum out on Friday Harbor actually runs a campaign where they ask people for suggestions, but you have to be a member of the museum. And in order to be a member, you can go on their page and adopt an orca. So it's a symbolic donation that you make. You pick an orca from J, K, or L pod to kind of adopt for a year. And they'll send you some information on that whale. And then when it comes time to make a suggestion, which I hear is supposed to happen pretty soon for the 2 new babies that are out there, you can email and give them your name suggestion. And from there, they're going to look at all the names that they receive and try to narrow it down to maybe 4. And then they open it up to the whole community. And from those 4 names, everybody gets to vote on what they think the best name would be. For our bigs, there are a lot of people around the Salish Sea, so up in British Columbia, down here around Washington State, and some folks who have worked here but might also work in California or Alaska. So marine biologists, educators like myself, other teachers, scientists, and we all came together and said, you know, all these Southern residents have names. We think that the bigs should get some nicknames too. And there are a lot of animals. Does anybody remember how many I told you we think we have out there?
500.
Over 500, and they grow at 4% every year. So to put that into perspective, we only have 74 Southern residents. Our big orcas have had 80 babies in the last 10 years. So they've had more babies than we have Southern residents right now. And so it's been hard to keep up with that. And it's the same process. So we're all kind of involved in an internal system. Everybody offers up names, and then we all vote. And so we don't narrow it down to 4. So if 30 people suggest 30 names, that's what we have to choose from to try to come up with names for these whales. But we have tried to keep it to people that know them and experience them. So naturalists that know kind of some quirky characteristics or their personality, to give them names that are kind of fitting, right? Kind of the same way that we name our pets. So not every Biggs killer whale has a name yet. We're still working on that, and we're collaborating with other people for suggestions too. But I'm kind of in the camp where I think if you see it first, that would be a pretty cool thing to be able to jump in there and name an orca, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you guys think about it and you want to be part of that process, stay tuned for whatever. The Whale Museum hasn't really released a date right now, so much as they've just let everybody know. Usually we try to wait about a year before giving some of the calves names to make sure that they're going to stick around with us. But we've had so little calves born to the population in the last few years that after they've been around for a few months, they've started to decide that that baby deserves a name. So we'll see what they do with that. That's a really good question. Anybody else? If not, I'm going to turn you loose. I did want to say before you hop off, everybody that registered for this today before 11, so if there were some folks that joined us late, originally we were going to try to, and we've done this before, where we've had a snack activity to go with talking about salmon. So I sent a little PDF with some of the ingredients that you would need to create a yummy salmon habitat. But we figured with the way things are going with COVID, and because so many ingredients were needed, we didn't want anybody to feel left out today. And we just decided we were going to do a few activities on the PowerPoint instead. But if you didn't get a copy of the salmon habitat, it's really cute. It's like graham crackers, pretzels for driftwood, there's sprinkles, there's Swedish fish for the salmon. It's actually kind of a cute, yummy way to put together salmon habitat and understand it, and then you get to eat it at the end. So if you want to something, you know, to do to follow this up, or something like homework, that's something that I can pass along to anybody who didn't get it as well. Laszlo, Rocky, and Lucy, you guys have anything to add?
Do orcas hibernate?
They don't. That's a really good question, though. Do you know how they sleep?
Do they sleep floating on the water?
So they do float on the water, but, oh, Charlie, do you want to tell them how they sleep? You know, don't you? It's not working. All right, she's having a trouble unmuting. So that's a really fun fact. Orcas don't sleep the way that we do. Oh, you're close. What happened? Let's see. Why can't you talk to us, Charlie? What happened? Oh.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties.
That's okay. So tell us how orcas sleep.
Well, since orcas are the biggest dolphins, they sleep pretty similar to dolphins. So I'm guessing it's the same. One eye open, half brain rested.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So they do come up to the surface. Orcas have to think about taking a breath. When we fall asleep at night, our body is still breathing for us without us having to actively think about, okay, take a breath, take a breath. Orcas, since they live in the marine environment, they have to think about it, which means they have to purposely come up to the surface, take a breath. And in order to make sure they're still doing that while they sleep, they only rest half of their brain at a time. So when they turn off that half, the other half is still awake enough to tell them to breathe. It's more like resting. And then the next time they rest, they're going to rest the opposite side of the brain that didn't get a chance to recover just yet. Dominic, do you have a question?
I've actually seen an orca whale when I was at my grandma and grandpa's house on Whidbey Island.
So that's a really good question to ask everybody by raise of hands. Who's seen orcas in the wild?
I have.
Yeah? Awesome. Well, good questions, you guys. We are not quite sure what we're going to do for our youth event next month. I am not going to be here technically, but we'll see what happens. I might pop in while I'm gone and check in with all you guys because this is a lot of fun anyway. But we'll come up with what our theme is going to be next and share it with you guys here probably within the next week or two to let you know when to tune in. We're going to try to stick with the third, I think it's the third Wednesday around 3 o'clock. So that we're humpback whales.
Bye.
That's not a bad idea, actually. We'll see what we can do.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, you guys. If you got to go, I totally get it. We're over time. So enjoy the rest of your day. And like I said, if we can help out at all, let us know.
I have one last question.
Sure.
How big are orca whales exactly?
So southern residents are a little bit smaller than the bigs, even though that's not why bigs are called big.
I think the big ones are like as big as our house.
So they can get up to about 30 feet, maybe 32 at the most, and those are going to be the big males. But that is pretty big if you think about it, right? Not the biggest, but still pretty big. So good question. Before I hop off too, do you guys have an email where you want me to send that PowerPoint so that you have the salmon life cycle slide?
I did write down emails from the chat. I think I got, yeah.
I'm not seeing them, so I'm glad you did that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
What's happening? Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you next month if you decide to pop back in with us, okay? Have fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thanks for saying.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm not going off.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to end it, and I think it's going to download the recording. So,
That was good. All right.
thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right, I'll see ya.